Hey guys, how you doing? My name is TJ, and in this video, I'm going to be sitting down with my friend as he tells us his story of going from coding bootcamp student to making over $130,000 as a senior software engineer. Now, we cover a lot in this video, so you definitely want to stick around and watch the whole thing because some of the topics we cover include the best way to learn how to code, working at a startup versus a larger company, salary expectations for junior engineers and just engineers overall in your career path. And we also even offer some salary negotiation tips as well for beginners. So we covered that and a lot more. And also, for those of you that have been wanting to schedule a phone call with me so you can ask me your questions about coding directly, check the description below and there's going to be a link for you to schedule that phone call. So, how you doing today, Vivek?
I'm doing pretty awesome, DJ. Thanks for having me here.
Would you mind briefly introducing yourself to the audience and just telling us a bit about what you were doing before you became a software engineer?
Yeah, sure. So before I became a software engineer, I was a software trainer.
Okay.
Which is kind of like a consultant, but but in my case, the job was to go to different clients' offices and teach them how to use the software that my company was selling.
Okay. So it was kind of like a training implementation type of role?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was a medical software. So, so doctors and clinicians would purchase it from my company and they would send me out there to teach them how to use technology because, a lot of doctors, they grew up and became doctors years ago. They didn't have to use computers. So it was an interesting job. I got to gain a lot of teaching skills there. Okay,
that's good. Interesting. So how did you get interested in coding? Did you have to know how to code for that job or?
Nope, that job was, my interest in coding came a long time before that. And I didn't actually know that I was interested in coding until I realized that, hey, why am I not coding for my job? Why am I doing this?
This is what?
The software training.
Okay.
But my interest in coding, to answer your question, started when I was a little kid.
You're taking it back.
I'm taking it back, yeah. I'd play video games and video games have modifications. So I was like, how am I going to do this? So that's when it really started. In college, I kind of got away from all of that stuff, but my degree was still computational biochemistry, which involved a little bit of programming in there.
Okay. What programming languages were you using?
Mostly I wasn't really using any languages, but mostly my experience was with just Perl. Because that's pretty common in medical technology and medical research. So.
All right, so could you tell us a bit about what your coding bootcamp experience was like?
Yeah. So my coding bootcamp was with the Iron Yard.
Iron Yard, okay.
Yeah, and it was a 3-month program.
Full-time, right?
Full-time, yes. Okay. I had to quit my job and basically live off of my savings account. So that part was a little bit scary.
Yikes, okay.
But, honestly, I can say it was the best experience or best decision I made. And because of how rigorous it is, every day I wake up, I go to the boot camp, I start coding. And then once I'm done with my work day, I code some more for homework. So that really, in those 3 months, I feel like I probably got enough experience with programming that most people probably get in a year.
In a year? Oh, wow. I guess, how did you best prepare for the bootcamp knowing that you weren't going to be able to actually work throughout it?
That's a really good question. Preparing for the bootcamp, it was a very deliberate thing. I had to make sure that I had enough money that I could survive the next 3 months and then some because, it's not guaranteed that I'm going to have a job right after I finish the bootcamp. And then to make sure that I succeeded with the bootcamp, I started programming exercises before I even went in there. my focus in the bootcamp was going to be backend Ruby on Rails.
Yep.
So my thought process was, well, if I'm going to focus on backend Ruby on Rails, then I need to learn all the basics and the front end stuff
first
before I start the bootcamp. So that was my plan of action. I refreshed myself with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I think that prepped me for the bootcamp pretty well.
Of course, because even though Ruby on Rails is a backend framework, like it is still like a full stack framework. And, in terms of having the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end for your actual like web page and website for people to see, and all of the logic on the back end in terms of Ruby. Is Ruby on Rails still kind of like a popular programming language, or?
If the recruiters are to be believed, it is. Ruby on Rails is still extremely popular.
But for juniors, or maybe for people like us, mid-level, senior, and up?
I think Ruby on Rails is popular for everybody, people at all skill levels, because a lot of businesses and companies, they start with Ruby on Rails because it makes it so easy to get off the runway. Yeah. And then once you have a business, then you have to maintain that application. So they're going to hire people of all skill levels to fill those positions.
Okay. And where do you think that React.js kind of fits in that? Did they teach you React in your bootcamp, or?
Yeah, great question about React. They did teach me a little bit of React in my bootcamp, but that was mainly because there were some students in my class that were interested in it. So that's kind of where we pivoted to near the end. But React is a great technology because you can use it to make single page applications. But if you're working in a Ruby on Rails app, you can just use React components inside a Ruby on Rails app very easily. So you're still mainly doing Rails, but you get to write some cool React code in it.
That's true. And for anyone that is interested, if you are actually looking to learn how to code, I teach people how to code as well in my program, which is Roots Technology Coding and Career Prep program. So check that out. That is a self-paced program where I teach you how to code as your mentor and tutor in a heavily project-based coding program. All right. Yeah. So how important would you say that like building projects is to actually helping you learn to code and kind of like understand all the tools and technologies that you're working with?
Yeah, building projects is, in my opinion, like the primary way to learn.
Okay.
Because you're going to just create an application, even if it's just like a copy of a popular like Reddit application or Twitter. You try to make these like a smaller versions of these projects, and you're going to just start thinking about how these technologies are built, and then you kind of learn that a lot of technologies are very similar.
Oh yeah.
And then just you learn how to tweak them to fit your needs.
Yeah, I know for me, it was so interesting when I kind of realized that all of these applications on the web and just almost everything on the web is just forms. Yeah. It's just forms that users are putting in data into, and then some like logic is running on the back end and giving some output, right? Like, but it's just crazy that everything is just mostly kind of forms and inputs. And that's what you're kind of building and tying that data together in the back end.
Yes, exactly, right. Exactly that.
Wow. So yeah, what was your first job as a software engineer like coming from the bootcamp?
My first job as a software engineer was at Everlywell, and it was a great experience. And
that's where we met, by the way.
That is where we met. That's how we know each other. But when I started at Everlywell, I was the second engineer there, and I think the fourth or fifth employee. So it was a really small scale company, and because of that, I got a lot of one-on-one learning time with my boss, and that experience is what really, I think, skyrocketed my knowledge. And having that mentor and that resource to teach you is so incredibly useful.
Interesting. So just to be a bit more clear, you started by working at a startup.
I did.
Was that a choice that you made on purpose, or did you just kind of like end up there?
The choice was just made for me because I was
just trying to get a job.
Yes. Like I said earlier, because of the boot camp, I had to quit my job and live off of my savings. So the goal out of the boot camp was, hey, get the first job that you can get. And that should be everybody's goal if they're going through that position. Finding a startup it can be a hit or miss.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the more important thing when you're looking for a job is to see if you're going to have a mentor at that position, someone willing to teach you everything that you need to know.
Wow. Do you feel like you ever dealt with imposter syndrome when you first started?
What do you mean when I first started? I still deal with imposter syndrome.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. So can you kind of talk to us a bit more about that?
Yes. The challenge with the imposter syndrome is there's always so much to know, and you're never going to know everything, and that's really where it stems from. If you start a new job, there are going to be people there who have worked there longer than you that are going to know the application better, or there are going to be people who have more experience in the industry than you, so they know the technology better, and then the imposter syndrome creeps in. But it's important to know that you have things to contribute. Even if you're just brand new to programming, your perspective is a good contribution to your team. And because people who are seasoned, they might not see the same problems that you do.
Exactly. You end up being a consultant that is brought in essentially to kind of give like a fresh set of eyes to the same problems that people have been looking at for years. Okay, so it definitely brings a lot of value. Yeah, and also I try to tell people that you are not going to be able to memorize everything either, but you need to be able to just kind of learn fast, like on the job. So how was that for you in terms of just like having to constantly learn something new on the job? Because that's typically what being a software engineer involves, especially when it comes to features, right? You are essentially building a new feature that doesn't yet exist at this company.
Yeah, and that's essentially the job. You're going to get a task, and the reason the engineers are getting this feature is because it doesn't exist. But there is a good chance that feature has been implemented somewhere else. So Google is your best friend.
Oh yeah.
Other engineers are your best friends, people who have done this. So that's usually my process. Whenever I get a feature that I need to implement, I'll think about it. Have I seen this somewhere before? Have I used this? See how it works on that application if I find it over there. Or if not, then you just Google it. Find other engineers that have implemented it before, have had the same problems. But I think in my experience, 99% of the features that I find or that I have to implement, they're just like a different version of something else that's already been implemented.
Okay. So before becoming a software engineer, did you have any misconceptions about the role that you now know is completely false and outrageous, essentially?
Ooh, that is a good question. Yeah. I think the biggest misconception that I had was that I would be expected to solve all the problems. And if I don't solve a problem, then I'm failing at my job. Like that was a misconception that I had, which is just not true, because once you get into a position and you're working through problems, you might run into a problem that you can't fix, at least not fix in the time that it needs to be fixed in. And the reality of the situation is that most people that, like your project managers or product managers, they're relying on you, and they're gonna trust your knowledge and your opinions on that stuff, and then you just kind of move on. Like the business will pivot if it needs to.
Okay. So do you still work at a startup now?
No, I do not work at a startup. I work.
I mean, you sound sad. You sound sad when you said that.
I do miss it a little bit. Right now, I work for WP Engine. They are a fairly large company now. They were a startup probably like 6-7 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And now they're more established. The nice thing about working at an established company is a lot of the problems that we get that my team works on, they are talked about and fleshed out really well before they get to us. So
Okay.
there are already designs, there's already thoughts about how we're going to roll it out. All that stuff is out there. So when you get to the engineers and programming, you know exactly what you're doing.
Okay.
At a startup, you're kind of like
Figuring it out.
figuring it out as you go. And
You might just be giving a one-line sentence in terms of what to build, right?
Yep, exactly. One line sentence, what to build, but then as you're working on it, more and more sentences keep coming in. So but there's like, the fun part about that too, because I think you get to be a lot more creative at a startup and put your ideas in, where at a more established companies, you don't really get that freedom. You have to because everybody else has jobs that are thinking about all of that stuff.
That's true. So you have also made the jump from being a software engineer mid-level to now senior software engineer. Tell us about that.
Going from software engineers, like the career trajectory, your roles, it may seem like they don't change a lot, and that's how that's what I used to think, that okay, yeah, with senior, I'll just have to solve harder problems and but there's actually a lot more that came with this role, because in addition to just solving harder problems, I am the senior engineer for my team. So my team comes to me for a lot of advice, mentorship, things like that. And I don't have all the answers for everything. So I have to be more communicative with other engineers in the company and just basically help everybody find the resources and answers that they need.
Wow. Okay, so senior is more of kind of like a leader, mentorship, guidance type role?
I think it probably depends on the company and the team dynamics. In my team, that's what I have found. But if you're on an engineering team, that's all senior engineers, which happens, and then your job might be more just programming, but your team gets the bigger projects that are more technically challenging.
I see. And so what is a typical Tuesday like in your life as a senior software engineer?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Just a typical Tuesday or workday. My Tuesdays are hit or miss because that's when our sprint planning and retro days are. So one of my Tuesdays every other week is full of meetings. Where we finish out our sprint. So we'll have a retro, which is just...
Would you mind telling us what a sprint is?
Oh,
sprint planning?
Sure, yeah. So this is how developers just typically work. A sprint is a period of time that the team will agree on certain projects to have work done on. So if we say, hey, in the next 2 weeks, we're going to commit to build out the purchase page. And that's going to be our sprint. That's going to be our goal. That's what the team is working on for that sprint or for that time period. And then once we're done, we have this meeting called a retrospective, which is just we're looking back on the sprint.
Done as in done with the work, or done with the 2 week sprint?
Done with the 2 week sprint.
Okay.
So done with the 2 week sprint. And then we have the retrospective where we talk about all the successes and failures of the previous 2 weeks. Now I say 2 weeks, but a sprint can be defined at any length of time. My company does it every 2 weeks.
Yeah, but it's typically 2, I think?
I think typically 2 is a safe bet. Most companies find that as a happy medium, but I have worked in 1 week sprints. I've worked in 4 week sprints.
So this is a funny story. Before I was a software engineer, I was working as a business analyst for a medical company, and we went from doing 2-week sprints to doing a 2-month sprint to doing a 3-month, getting trained in agile, the actual process, and then coming back to doing a 2-week sprint. Then we did a 1-week sprint. I was just okay, guys.
All that in just one job.
All that in one job. And now, okay. But yeah, so typically companies don't have that back and forth like that. They kind of just have like a set process and they move forward. So
It's more about like the being consistent with whatever time frame you choose. But as I was saying with the retrospective, we don't, if the sprint had some failed items, like we didn't finish that purchase page that we talked about, then in the retrospective, we would discuss why that happened, how we can improve, and the next sprint will plan a little bit better to fit our needs.
Okay. Is there any fear of being criticized or ostracized in these meetings? Or does that depend on the startup?
That depends on the company. Yeah, that depends on the company. And I think if you find that you are not free to speak your mind in these retro meetings, then that's usually a bad sign of a company, and I would bail. Because that's really like the core. Like, hey, you should be able to voice your opinions. Any positive things you have, like voice those too. But if you have any negative things, talk to your team about it. Be comfortable. And most of the time they'll listen.
Yeah, so. That's true. What do you enjoy most about being a software engineer and just being in this role in general?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, the things that I enjoy most are just having the freedom to, work at my own pace. I don't feel like the pressure that, hey, I, get this done by this deadline, because, and that part, I guess, depends on the company as well.
Yeah, I was like, hold on, because it's so interesting. I have actually been working almost nonstop for the past 2 days because my company came up with a deadline for next Tuesday, and I'm off on Monday, but they came up with a deadline for an item that I was working on before mentioning it, and it was just kind of given to me like, oh yeah, we are doing a demo next week and we need to have this done. I was like,
That is stressful.
That happens.
In that situation, do you feel like if you don't finish this, then your job is at risk?
Yeah, so not at risk per se, but it definitely put me in a place where I was feeling a bit anxious and pressure to where I was now spending hours outside of work trying to finish it as well.
Yeah, and I've definitely been in that situation as well. And yeah, that's like a tough thing to navigate because you obviously want to prioritize your work-life balance and make sure you're not getting burnt out, because so many engineers go through that. They're going to either just to please their boss or their coworkers, or even just to maybe feel better themselves that they're contributing. They'll like just work overtime and then get burnt out. And then when you get burnt out, you're in a position where you're going to go weeks without being productive.
Wow.
And I think a lot of companies make that big mistake where they don't keep the engineers' like mental health in check, and they get burnt out, and then they're like, hey, why aren't we getting anything done? Well, it's because they had to work extra hard to get that other thing done. So yeah, I feel like if I was in a situation like that, and I have been, those are the reasons why I leave those positions. And right now I have the autonomy to work at my own pace. If I need to push back a deadline, I can do that without feeling like I'm going to get any pushback.
I see.
So those are the positive things that you want to look for.
That's good. So you actually brought up a very good topic of burnout and mental health. So what are some good mental health practices or tips that you do to avoid burnout and to just stay fresh?
Yeah, I have a rule that after 5 o'clock, which is where my workday ends, I close my laptop.
You just slap shut and that's it.
Yeah, and if I'm like in the middle of a conversation with somebody,
You
like
just hang up.
I don't hang up. I just give them a warning that I'm going to be logging off at 5 o'clock, and everybody understands. And my workday, it starts at 9. So sometimes, while I'm having my coffee, I'll like start looking at Slack before 9. But usually, like I keep that in the 9 to 5 window for my work hours, and that's the big key thing, I think. And the thing that I mentioned about the retrospectives earlier and feeling like feeling like you can say whatever you need to your team, that also helps avoid burnout. Because if you're feeling like you're not going to get something done, bring it up.
Yeah.
Do not wait until like it's too late.
Yeah.
That just keeping that balance in check is what really helps me. But even then, you have to take time off.
Yeah. Okay.
Gotta step away from the code, even though it's awesome.
Wait, so here, what advice do you have for someone that is looking to go from software engineer to senior engineer? Like, what do you think is kind of needed or shift in mindset is needed to make that jump?
That is a really good question, because I think like going from software engineer to senior software engineer, most people just think it's, oh, I just need to improve my technical knowledge, which is true. Like you have to improve your technical knowledge. But I think a lot of people don't really chase down those opportunities to improve the technical knowledge, which comes from designing bigger systems, thinking in the bigger picture rather than writing like that perfect method. It's more about, how am I going to implement this? What are the risks that are going to happen? Just asking questions that you normally wouldn't think about. I know that's a little bit counterintuitive, but you like as an engineer, you're writing the code, but you might not think how it's going to impact your entire systems as a whole, which is the step that you need to take.
Okay. Well, here, can you kind of give us examples and ideas of salary ranges in terms of, your first job as a software engineer, and then what to kind of expect as you move to mid-level and now potentially senior as well?
Yeah, this information changes based on your location and everything. So my perspective is going to be from Austin,
Texas,
surrounding area. So when I first started as a junior engineer, and this was at a startup, and startups that are really small will usually pay you a lot less because they're going to give you equity, which could be worth something, which could not be worth it.
Wait. So would you mind briefly explaining what equity is and how it works as a software engineer? Yeah.
So equity is most companies will give you some equity, and they're gonna say this is an option grant. So the way it works is you get this grant, which isn't yours yet. It vests over a period of time. So you have to typically work there for 4 years to get the full investment.
And equity is ownership in the company, by the way.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, equity is ownership in the company. And then they give you that ownership in the form of these option grants. And then every year you'll vest a little bit more. Now, once it's vested, you have to, it's still not yours. You have to actually exercise those options, which means you're paying money to buy those options. So if you're familiar with stocks, it's basically like you're buying the stock at this point. You can't sell it because most startups are going to be like private companies. Yeah. So you have to kind of hold on to that equity until the company goes public or somebody buys them out.
If they go public. If they succeed, essentially.
So equity is as an employee, you are taking a risk because that money could be worthless, or that equity could be worthless. But if you're getting paid, then that's going into your bank account. Yeah,
it is definitely something to weigh considerably, but How much way would you say that somebody in their first year as a software engineer should put on this? You know, especially if you are like a self-taught software engineer and trying to get your first job.
Yeah, if you're getting your first job as a software engineer, then that's going to be the hardest part, where like negotiations are not going to be in your favor
At all.
because the employers know that, hey, this is your first job. So from their perspective, they're taking a chance on you, and you have to kind of prove to them that you're worth it. So my first job at Everlywell, I think I was offered in the low 60s. I'm not entirely sure what I started at. But I also got some equity. So at that time, I didn't know anything. So I was just like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. And I just wanted a job, so I took it. But that first year, or in my 2 years there, I think I was there for 2 whole years, I got 3 to 4 raises, which is very uncommon most people only get raises once a year. But it's because you're proving your worth, you're doing the hard work, and then you kind of use that to ask for raises. And I've had to do that a couple of times because it's like, hey, I'm performing at this level, and you find out how you're performing by just comparing yourselves to other engineers. Yeah. And you show them the work that you showed. When I say them, like people who's your boss. Leadership. Show them what you're contributing and make your case. And if they give you a raise, that's great. If not, then it's time to look for another job.
Okay. So you were making about how much in your first job?
In my first job, I went from from the low 60s to 100K by the time I left. Okay. And then in my second job, so my first job, I guess I was a junior engineer, transitioned to mid-level. So those were the ranges that were there like 5 years ago. My God, that was a long time ago. Yeah. My second job was a mid-level engineer where I started at around 120, and I was around 130 by the time I left. Okay. And my job as a senior engineer, I started at 130. So not a big jump there. But the main reason why I took this job was because of the title change, which is good. And the company was just really good. I like working for WP Engine. Name drop.
That's good. So I guess, what is next for you in terms of thinking about your career path as an engineer?
That is a good question. I have been thinking about this a lot. So from senior engineer, my career path, I thought that I wanted to do staff engineer, which is an engineer that's more technically focused, that's going to find and solve like big technical challenges. Yeah. Okay. And they're going to be a resource for all of the other engineers in the company. My goal, however, has shifted, and I think I want to go into management and become an engineering manager.
Why?
The reason is I think I would just perform better in that role.
You would do great, by the way. So
thanks. Yeah, in my role right now, I'm the tech lead for my team as well, with the senior engineer. So I get to help out my teammates a lot. I get to unblock them on their problems that they're having. I get to help them find resources. And I just enjoy doing that stuff a lot more than solving big technical problems. So right now I'm on the track to become a engineering manager. So that's my immediate next goal.
Awesome. Well, Vivek, thank you so much for all of the information that you've given today. Do you have any more tips or advice for anyone that's interested?
Yes, I forgot one major thing.
Uh-oh.
When discussing salaries, also take into consideration bonuses, which are going to be a huge part. And whenever your company has evaluations and reviews, brag about everything you did. Wow. Because that's what's going to go into those raises. That's what they're going to use. So.
That's true. That's true. And also, yeah, I'm glad that you brought this up. Even as a junior software engineer, even though you might not be able to negotiate like your actual pay, you might be able to negotiate things like your title, right? So instead of junior software engineer, you might be able to get them to remove the junior from that and just have it as software engineer, because that impacts things as you like progress in your career.
That is a very good point. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was the case at Everlywell for me. I never had the junior in my title.
Because recruiters don't see that, and they just pretty much hit you up on LinkedIn, etc. Because honestly, I feel like getting the first job as a software engineer is the hardest part. But once you get that first job, what's it been like for you? Yeah, from your experience.
It's exactly that. The recruiters are not going to look at your actual job. They're just looking at your titles and some keywords. And as soon as I got the senior in my title,
floodgates open.
Floodgates are open. I get multiple recruiter emails a day, and it's pretty obnoxious. I even got harassed by a recruiter who somehow found my phone number, which I guess is out there somewhere. So he's calling me and leaving me voice messages like, "What will it take for me to get you to leave WP Engine?" I'm like, oh my God.
A private jet, the CEO role. Oh man, but yeah, again, thank you so much, Vivek. Really appreciate you coming out, okay?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, and that's it.
Bye.